and welcome to this edition of The New Normal, the show that brings you France 24 correspondents' best reporting from around the world. This week, we'll be taking you to Brazil, to Ethiopia, and to Israel. But first, we begin in Armenia. The fighting has stopped in Nagorno-Karabakh, but both parties, Azerbaijan and Armenia, mutually accuse each other of having used white phosphorus incendiary bombs during the conflict. Now, these weapons are not explicitly banned under international law, but their usage is controversial due to the cruel wounds inflicted. Our reporters, Roméo Langlois, Mohamed Farhat, and Luc Schrago, went to a hospital in Yerevan.
At this burns unit in Yerevan, hospital staff are struggling with an influx from the army. It's thought these soldiers could have come into contact with white phosphorus, a highly incendiary substance that ignites on contact with the air.
C'est extrêmement profond, ça va jusqu'à l'os et ça brûle, ça ronge l'os. Et lui, il est brûlé partout. En fait, ça traverse les vêtements.
C'est vraiment assez caractéristique des armes chimiques ou au phosphore.
Elise and Artiv are both French Armenians and have come to help the victims of the war. The hospital has dozens of wounded troops, all with the same kind of burns.
C'est absolument pas similaire à des brûlures, entre guillemets, classiques.
There are other factors too. Wounds that seem under control, which then take an abnormal turn for the worse. Problems with metabolism, unexplained heart attacks. All are issues known to come from phosphorus burns. This French surgeon has been scanning through patient files.
Je ne peux pas encore répondre de manière formelle, mais il semble qu'ils aient des troubles métaboliques graves, ce qui est compatible avec des brûlures chimiques. Lorsqu'on a une brûlure chimique par certains types de composés comme le phosphore, on a des troubles des ions dans le sang, c'est-à-dire le calcium qui diminue par exemple et qui peut entraîner des troubles cardiaques graves. Mais c'est possible en tout cas que ce ne soit pas uniquement des brûlures physiques par flamme.
This footage from Armenian television shows what's thought to be phosphorus falling on a forest in Nagorno-Karabakh. It's a formidable way to burn through vegetation, and the Armenian forces using it for cover.
Un blessé, il y en a 10 qui sont morts, qui ne sont pas arrivés jusque-là. C'est des armes qui sont tellement terribles qui ne blessent pas seulement le malade, mais qui atteignent le soignant. Ça veut dire que quand quelqu'un essaye d'aider ces blessés-là, il se brûle s'il n'est pas armé, entre guillemets, de matériel suffisamment non inflammable.
While the use of phosphorus isn't banned under international law, its use is tightly regulated under an international agreement that neither Azerbaijan nor Armenia have signed. However, a number of NGOs have demanded its prohibition for years, given its brutal effects.
Ils inhalent le produit incriminé et donc ça brûle aussi les bronches. Donc ce que vous voyez à l'extérieur, il y a la même chose au niveau pulmonaire.
Azerbaijan denies using phosphorus weapons, levelling the same accusation at Armenia in turn, as Yerevan's burns victims begin a long path towards recovery that could last months or even years, if they survive.
Ethiopia's military operation in the Tigray region is now having regional repercussions as tens of thousands of refugees pour into neighboring Sudan. Now, our correspondent Bastien Renouille went to Ashaba camp. That's along the border. There, doctors who are themselves refugees care for the wounded.
These Ethiopian refugees are setting up a makeshift clinic in the Sudanese camp of Hashaba. They just received medicine given by the region's biggest hospital. The 3 doctors survived the bombings in the city of Humera.
I was making around in the medical ward of the hospital, and all of a sudden, artillery shells attacked the town, and many wounded people came, and people were, so much disturbed and screaming everywhere.
The doctor is receiving a new patient. A grenade tore off part of his hand.
I was fleeing into the woods with many other people. There were bombings, and the army was firing shots. I came across a militia, and they attacked me by throwing grenades.
His wound is infected. He has to change his bandage. His other hand and his belly are riddled with shrapnel.
These are one of the bad forms of attacks that we have seen in the last violence, in the past violence. But you see, most of the people that have sustained such kind of injuries, they were finished 2 days.
The doctor then goes to see patients who are not able to move. This man's legs are paralyzed and he was targeted while going to the city using his wheelchair. There were armed men in the streets and a group threw him to the ground and hit him before leaving him for dead.
They were civilians, youngsters, but I don't know who they were. Some had stones, others sticks, axes and machetes.
Among the Ethiopians who found refuge in Sudan, many recount the same scenes of violence. Almost all of them say they saw dozens of bodies along the roads during their journey to the border.
And now to the Amazon rainforest in Brazil, where the Yanomami, a local tribe, are fighting to retrieve the bodies of members of their community. They want to bury them on their traditional lands. It's a report by our correspondent, Valeria Saccone.
Junior Hekurari Yanomami is a senior member of his indigenous community. The COVID-19 pandemic has claimed victims in their reserve in northern Brazil, situated near the Venezuelan border. In Yanomami culture, funerals are complex and important.
We have to cremate the bodies. There's a set of procedures to follow. We have to get permission and select members who will take care of the ashes for 2 years before the burial can take place.
12 Yanomami people are buried at this cemetery in Boa Vista, the capital of Roraima state. Local authorities have not allowed the bodies to be returned to their native villages.
We contacted the Brazilian authorities a little while ago. They were unable to understand how important burials were for us. It was a real culture shock.
Among those buried here are 2 Yanomami babies suspected of having contracted the coronavirus. There's no crematorium in Boa Vista. To avoid the risk of infections, the authorities have set a 3-year minimum waiting period before the bodies can be exhumed.
The mothers of the deceased infants are very sad. They're desperate. They're staying in the reserve, waiting for their babies' bodies to be returned.
Back in July, France 24 filmed the Brazilian Army's anti-COVID mission inside the Yanomami reserve, home to 28,000 inhabitants.
We know that the bodies of the Yanomami must be returned to their families at one point, but we'd like to begin that process in total safety, when there is no longer any risk of contamination to the rest of the community.
The Brazilian government says it will pay for the exhumation and transfer of the deceased when the time comes. For now, the Yanomami are waiting, torn between hope and pain.
We finish in Israel, where 2 Jewish communities are fighting over access to a part of the Asi River. One group, living in a kibbutz that was founded before the State of Israel was created, have privatized the stream, while residents of the neighboring city would like to have access in order to have a swim. The case that says a lot about divisions within the Israeli society has ended up in court. It's a report by Gwendoline de Bono.
Here's the stream that's causing all the problems. It runs through kibbutz Nir David, which was founded in 1936. Tamir grew up on the kibbutz and lives here with his wife and son.
I was born in '87, so my entire life I was born and raised in the kibbutz. So I used to play here in the river, play in the grass outside, swim. Very good memories.
Residents of surrounding towns now want access to this section of the creek. And under Israeli law, a river can't be privately owned. But kibbutz families who settled here when the place was just a swamp see this as an intrusion.
It's a private land that we're sitting on. We are paying $300,000 every single year for this land. And their demand for 9.5 million people for the entire Israel just come over, sits in a kindergarten, You know, there's no security. They can sit at people's homes, do barbecues. Who's going to clean after them? They're calling us Nazis. And there are people that are Holocaust survivors. Let's live here.
In the evening, protesters gather at the entrance to the kibbutz. If the tone is rising, it's because this little creek is a symptom of a deep rift and historic discrimination. Most of the protesters are Mizrahim, North African and Arab Jews. In their eyes, the people behind these barriers are the Ashkenazi elite, European Jews, who they say discriminated against their parents and grandparents during the early days of the state.
When Israel was founded, and even before, people came here from Arabs, from the Middle East and Arab countries, and they put them in places that are, I can say, not as beautiful as here. They took over the places that has the water and the facilities and everything. And now we are looking for justice.
Some protesters make it inside. The kibbutz guards don't stop them. They come out with a smile. Though they didn't swim, they feel they did right a wrong.
Well, that's it for this edition. Thank you for watching. I'd like to thank Sylvain Rousseau for the camera work and Natasha Milret for the coordination. I leave you with these images of the world's tallest outdoor elevator. It is set in China along what is known as Avatar Cliff. It was named after James Cameron's famous blockbuster. Please do stay home, stay safe and stay tuned to France 24.
Hello, I'm Annette Young, the host of the 51%. Now, for many of you, the typical image of the Parisian woman is somebody who's svelte, seductive and mysterious, often white, whose individual sense of style has become the global benchmark for beauty. But in this week's special edition, we're going to show you that the reality is a different story indeed.
The 51%, presented by Annette Young on France 24 and France24.com.